Hello and welcome to today's Author's Corner. I'm Diane Okonski, President of the Icelandic National League of the United States, and I'm very happy you could join us today. Before we get started, I just have two logistical things to go over with you. The first is that the program is being recorded and will be available on the INLUS website in just a day or two. Second, as attendees to this program, you are on mute. However, we welcome your questions and will answer as many as possible during the course of the program. To ask a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And if you're on a phone or a tablet, the button may be in the upper right corner, or you may have to swipe to find it. But don't let that stop you. We want to, as I said, hear your questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. Also, if you're not yet a member of the INLUS, now is a good time to join. It'll make sure you stay informed on our upcoming programs and information. To join, just go to www.inlus.org and click the Join Us button. Tonight, we have with us Nancy Marie Brown, who will introduce us to her new book, Looking for the Hidden Folk: How Iceland's Elves Can Save the Earth. The book will actually come out tomorrow, so we're just thrilled to have her here on the eve of its publishing. Carrie Kazubel is facilitating the discussion this evening, and Nancy and Carrie, happy to have you back with us, and I can't wait to hear the program. Carrie, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Diane. Good evening, everyone. I am Carrie Kazubel, and I am a proud member of the INLUS. And I'm a big fan of our guest tonight, author Nancy Marie Brown, who is also a founding member of the INLUS. I expect many of you are familiar with Nancy's work, as she has written several books about Iceland, Vikings, and the sagas. You might have attended the two INLUS webinars with Nancy last year. One was to discuss Icelandic horses and her book, A Good Horse Has No Color, and another to discuss her book, The Real Valkyrie. If you missed those or want to watch them again, they are available in the 2021 archives of the INLUS webpage. But Nancy is here tonight to introduce us to her newest book, Looking for the Hidden Folk: How Iceland's Elves Can Save the Earth, which, as Diane said, is being released tomorrow. There will be time for questions from the audience, so please type your questions into the Q&A field. But for now, it's time to turn it over to the woman we all came to hear, Nancy Marie Brown.
Thank you so much, Carrie. It's nice to have everybody here. I'm going to be sharing my screen, so I'm going to see if I can make that happen. All right. I think you've got the book cover there. This book, as one of my early readers pointed out, is a love song for Iceland. The first time I went there in 1986, it was like I had found a piece of myself that, if I hadn't quite lost it, it had been long suppressed. And I originally conceived of this book as a collection of travel essays based on the journals of my many trips to Iceland. I drafted some of them as chapters or separate articles back in 2009. Then in the summer of 2016, on my 21st trip to Iceland, I took a walk with an elf seer, Ragnhildur Jónsdóttir. And that winter, I'd like to say my collection of travel essays was hijacked by the elves. So let me advance here. Ragnhildur and I took a walk in a lava field that she and her elf friends had protected from destruction when a new road was built nearby. We didn't talk much about elves or the hidden folk as we walked. Instead, we photographed lava crags and stacks and pillars, pillows of silver green moss, caves and clefts, and individual lichen-splashed rocks. We listened to the wind sighing in the knee-high willows and the incessant cries of seabirds, black-backed gulls barking, now, 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 and Arctic terns, many terns, with their piercing kriya cries. It was by turns warm and sunny and cloudy and cool, a fine summer's day. The breeze was light, just enough to keep the gnats at bay. The land smelled of peat with hints of salt and sea. We wondered about pointing out plants. I didn't keep a list, but 2 hours later, back at my hotel when I wrote up my recollections, I remembered blueberry, crowberry, stone bramble, violet, dandelion, mountain avens, buttercup, butterwort, wood geranium, wild thyme, willow shrubs with pale fluffy catkins, and several kinds of grass, including sheep sorrel, which we tasted. It was sour as limes. Elves cut moss was the only sign of elves I saw. We talked about art and inspiration. What is inspiration? Why do some places attract artists and spark creative thought? Why are some places beautiful? And how do you define beauty? And we shared an experience I still can't explain. Said Rockhilder as we left the lava field. Now do you believe in elves? Looking for the hidden folk is my attempt to answer that question. And it's a question that seemed to get harder to understand the more I tried. For years, I found myself wandering through history, religion, folklore, and art, circling back to explore theology, literary criticism, mythology, and philosophy, stopping along the way to dip my toes into cognitive science, psychology, anthropology, biology, volcanology, cosmology, and quantum mechanics. I used to work as a science writer for a university, you see, so my quest took some unusual turns. Each discipline I found defines and redefines what is real and what is unreal, what is natural and what is supernatural, what is demonstrated and what is theoretical, what is alive and what is inert. Believing in elves, I learned, is a lot like believing in quantum mechanics. It is a way of perceiving and valuing the world around us. All of the travel essays I had been working on, I realized, shared one theme. Icelanders see nature in different ways than I had been taught to see it. In Iceland, where the geology and the weather patterns are as fantastic as anything Tolkien thought up, the imagination is set free and the mind is urged to pay attention. In Iceland, I felt more alive, more open to wonder and beauty, because to the Icelanders I met, the world around us, every rock and every hill, is inhabited by elves, yes, but also by stories. Stories shape how you see the world. They determine not only how you think of elves, but how you think of real things, such as hills and mountains and volcanoes. The stories we tell protect a place or permit its destruction. That's why it seems to me we make a critical mistake when we laugh off an Icelander's belief in elves. We assume that we each agree by what we mean by belief and elf. Think about it this way. If Icelanders are crazy to talk to elves, are Christians likewise crazy to talk to God? What immaterial beings are we allowed to believe in? And who is allowed to do the believing? In 1974, an Icelandic psychologist conducted a survey on spiritual matters. Of those who responded, 5% had seen an elf, while 33%, quote, entertained the possibility of their existence. In 2006, the University of Iceland conducted a similar survey. Again, 5% of Icelanders said they had seen an elf. This time, more than 50% entertained the possibility of their existence. Let's put those numbers into context. According to recent surveys, 10% of Americans say they've seen a UFO, and 48% of Americans are, quote, open to the idea that alien spacecraft are observing our planet. Look at it another way. 81% of Americans say they believe in God, and 64% are, quote, convinced that God exists. Is an elf more like a UFO, or is an elf more like God? For folklorist Terry Gunnell, who organized the 2006 Elf survey, the most striking result is that in spite of the radical changes in Icelandic society since 1974, the Icelanders' traditional beliefs about elves had remained nearly the same. They were, he concluded, deeply rooted. The idea that some people can see elves and others cannot does have a long history in Iceland. When Ragnhildur Jónsdóttir wrote to the mayor on behalf of the elves living in the lava field in 2013, she called herself sjáandi, a seer. She did not have to define the term. As the Lutheran Bishop of Iceland wrote in 1570, elves are invisible to us unless they wish to appear. Yet the properties of certain men's eyes are such that no spirit can ever escape their sight. What are these properties? No one knows. Then again, seeing itself remains something of a mystery. According to neuroscientist Chris Frith, quote, "The brain creates the world from the very limited and imperfect signals provided by our senses, from our experiences and our expectations, from what we've been taught and what we've read. The brain creates, quote, a prediction of what ought to be out there in the world." Our eyesight doesn't answer the question, what is this? But instead, what is this like? Says neuroscientist Moshe Bar, our perception of the environment relies on memory as much as it does on incoming information. In 2010, I met this volcano, Eyjafjallajökull. What was it like? Not a cyclops or a titan, as volcanoes were to the ancient Greeks. The classics did not shape my worldview. My volcano was a dragon. Here's how I describe it in the book. The craters sighed and snored like a dragon's nostrils. Whoosh, shush, whoosh, shush, whoosh, shush, whoosh, shush, and snorted red-orange fountains of flame. Stars fell down the sides of the new-made hills. Lava drops bounced and rolled like gold coins. Black ash peppered the snow. At the tips of the dragon's cooling limbs, the lava still moved, bulging and breaking, tinkling like broken glass, but more rhythmic and musical. As the sun set, the colors bloomed. A fat yellow tongue of living rock oozed over one crater's side. Orange eyes twinkled in the dark arms of lava. The lava fountains turned hot pink. I filled my camera's memory card. I filled my mind until my visual sense was stupefied. When I say I saw a dragon, I'm speaking metaphorically. Elf seer Ragnhildur Jónsdóttir is not, but the elf she sees may not look like any elf you might see. Elves have always been shapeshifters. The word is a bottle, the concept a liquid. Throughout history and across cultures, elves can only be seen when they wish to be seen, and they can take on whatever shapes they like. Or perhaps what's true about mountains is also true about elves. We see what we've been trained to see, what our education allows us to see. So what image comes to mind when I say elf? Do you see Santa's toy makers, the Keebler elves, the Tooth Fairy, Tinkerbell? The elves Ragnhildur sees, or at least those in the illustrations of her books, look much like people, though they may be dressed in old-fashioned clothes. Some are tall, some are small, some have pointy ears, and some have green skin, but some look like trees. In the earliest stories in English or Icelandic, elves are like gods and goddesses. Think of Tolkien's Galadriel, as so beautifully acted by Cate Blanchett. In the tale of Thomas the Rhymer from the 1200s, the elf queen is a beautiful lady on a white horse who kidnaps Thomas and turns him into a sex toy. It was Shakespeare, writing in the 1600s, who shrank the fairy queen to, quote, no bigger than an agate stone, the gemstone in the ring on a rich man's finger. Rather than riding a white horse, she comes in a chariot made from half a hazelnut shell and the gauzy bits of grasshoppers' wings. Where once elves were godlike, now they're insect-like. What do you see when I say troll? In the stories I knew, trolls were evil and ugly and stupid. They could be tricked, but they could never be trusted. Then Rockhilder told me the story of a kind troll, a mountain spirit that had saved Rockhilder's neighbor from falling down an icy hillside. Ooh, how did that happen? That instinct of mine to distinguish evil troll from kindly spirit is a modern fault. We are obsessed with classification. Medieval people were not. Trolls, giants, monsters, elves, any of them might be human enough to have children with. They are all the same species by a modern definition of that term. In the earliest Icelandic texts, the words troll and elf and dwarf are interchangeable. We really have no idea what these words mean. All are used, writes folklorist Arman Jakobsson, quote, somewhat like a modern anthropologist might use the term God or deity. All that's clear about Iceland's elves is that they were once worshipped. Elves were declared evil by the Christian church in the early 1200s. Around the same time, these poems and stories were first written down. Elf seers were denounced as witches and, in the 1400s, burnt at the stake in some countries. In our day, elves are not so much evil as trivial. Our world has been disenchanted. Everything can be understood by science, we think. Everything can be tamed, even if we haven't tamed it or understood it quite yet. As sociologist Max Weber predicted in the early 20th century, soon, quote, there will be no more mysteries, no more magic, no more wonder. Ludwig Wittgenstein found that to be a serious problem. His philosophy, says historian Michael Saylor, quote, awakens us to awe, possibility, difference, and a humble acceptance of the provisional nature of our understanding. These are things I think about often when I'm in Iceland. Though I've never seen an elf or a troll, I've had several encounters with the supernatural while traveling in Iceland over the last 35 years. Once, while crossing the cold desert at the island's heart on horseback. One night during that horse trek, jotting notes in our cabin, I felt eyes on my neck. Here's how I describe that experience in Looking for the Hidden Folk. And I'm going to read pages 167 to 168. I turned to see a glacier outside the window, stretching across three of them and around the corner like an intelligence looming between earth and sky, gleaming yellow-white, unlike anything real, brilliant, misshapen, awake, a rising moon in wintertime, its edges blurred and shifting. It seemed to breathe. It drew me outside in spite of sore muscles. I walked dead away from it, across the tussocky field to the gravel banks of the glacial river. The day was warm now that the clouds had lifted. I took off my boots to wade. The water was not icy in the shallows over black sand. It made me want to strip and bathe, but I was not quite alone. Other riders were about. One man perched on a rock right around the corner. I had never bathed naked in a glacial river before. I had never thought to do anything remotely like that on any of my many trips to Iceland. I waited on, looking for a secret spot. Wind sang in my ears. A golden plover called, "Bee, bee, bee, bee." The roar of the river was louder than either wind or bird, but somehow so constant as to mimic silence. A shadow rushed across the sun. I shivered and looked up. Unknowingly, I had turned a circle. The glacier was right in my face. Wings of black cloud rising behind the ice warned me the fine weather wouldn't last. But how long did I have? There was no scale here. I could not guess how high or far that ice cap was. I walked barefoot across warm black sand braided with turf, soft and spongy and squishy with goose droppings. I decided to ignore their provenance. They felt nice between my toes. I picked up a goose feather. A series of jagged peaks beside the glacier puzzled me. They were covered top to toe with snow, while the mountains in line with them were wholly snowless and blue. Aha! I was seeing only the tips of high snow-capped peaks, their bases hidden beneath the horizon's curve. The glacier was half hidden as well. The black clouds flew closer. I picked up 3 rough, rounded black rocks to remember the river by and let fly my goose feather as a gift in return. I quickened my pace and was startled to see sheep tracks way out here in the wild. The river now ran a greenish gray, milky with silt, its swirling current deadly fast. The sand petered out. I hauled myself up the high grassy bank, startling geese and goslings, and saw nothing at all around me but river, mountains, ice, and sky. No hut, no horses, no signs of human life. As if I'd stepped through a door into another world, a door into other time. That was a feeling I have never forgotten, a feeling that brought home to me how insignificant I really was, and how vast and timeless and beautiful and dangerous the earth could be. When I first decided to go to Iceland in 1986, I had dinner with some Icelandic students at Penn State, where I worked then. I told them I wanted to visit this glacier, Snæfellsjökull. They approved. The Economist said New Agers ranked this glacier the second most holy mountain in the world after a peak in the Himalayas. The mother of the seismologist who was visiting added, I know what they mean. I have never felt it like I felt it there. She did not define it. Each of my succeeding trips to Iceland has been made or marred by catching sight of the glacier or failing to. My journals are rich with sightings or the wish for them. Went horseback riding for over 4 hours, I wrote. The glacier kept itself hidden. No glacier, the clouds are too thick and low. No glacier, but some other mountains came and went. No glacier yet. The glacier kept staring at us, beautiful and mysterious, 2 horns on top like eyes on a skate, the glacier all white. This feeling of being drawn toward a magic mountain is universal. Other writers feel it about Mount Ararat in Turkey or Mount Antake in Japan. The word one writer uses is not magic, but holy. Another word that applies is wonder. Wonder is an emotion. According to philosopher Jesse Prince, it's wonder that produces both religion and science, as well as art. The 3 institutions that are most central to our humanity, he says, are united in wonder. They are not in conflict. They are not either or. Each allows us to transcend our animality by transporting us to hidden worlds. It's wonder, he argues, that makes us humor. And it's wonder that is at the heart of looking for the hidden folk. We all tell stories, we always have, but we don't always take responsibility for the effects of our storytelling. The purpose of a story is not to pass the time. The purpose of a story is to help you lead a good life. In looking for the hidden folk, I invite you to join in intimate conversation about how we look at and find value in nature. I hope to reveal how the words we use and the stories we tell shape the world we see. I argue that our beliefs about the earth will preserve or destroy it. Scientists name our time the Anthropocene, the human age. Climate change will lead to the mass extinction of species unless we humans change course. Iceland suggests a different way of thinking about the earth, one that to me offers hope. Icelanders believe in elves, and you should too. Now I'll take questions. Thanks, Carrie. Carrie, you've got to unmute or we can't hear you.
I'm glad I could take that as the first person to forget to unmute myself.
All right, good.
Take one for the team. That's lovely, Nancy. This book is full of so many wonderful stories about your travels in Iceland. And one of my favorites is a story that you just shared with us a little earlier about your trek through the Highlands and your experience at Hofsjökull. And if there are members of the USIHC that are on this call tonight, we had the pleasure of reading this story in the current edition of the quarterly magazine. And the story is Riding the Keel. And there's a quote that you have in the book and in the article by Gillian Overing that really spoke to me. And I wonder if you would read that for us too, please.
Yeah, I am. This was in 1992 that I attended a lecture at the International Medieval Congress in Kalamazoo, Michigan. In Iceland, Gillian Overing noted, the center is the margin. Geography is inside out. People settle on the temperate edges of the island, while its interior is a glacial desert, cold, inhospitable, and not even crossable most of the year. What kind of self, she mused, might these places reflect? What kind of self has wilderness at its heart? I actually was thinking of starting the book with that quote, but it ended up in the middle of the book somehow. Books are like that, you know, they have their own idea about how things should be told and what order you should tell them.
It, even in the middle of the book, it stands
jumped out at you. Yeah.
Yes,
And
yeah.
she does, she has a good book that she wrote about Iceland and traveling in Iceland, but she never actually answers that question. You know, it was really the question that stuck with me, not the answers, you know, the attempts to answer it. You could probably come up with 100 different possible answers, but you know, mine was a whole book long.
Well, I'm glad you wrote it. I was wondering what Icelanders think about the book. Has the reception been positive?
You know, it's always the stressful period when you send the manuscript of the book to the people that you've written about, and you think, oh boy, what are they going to think of me? You know, how are they going to respond to this? And when I did send it to Ragnhildur Jónsdóttir, the elf seer, who has a very large part in the book. But I had quoted many folklore professors and people who had written about Iceland. And I thought, you know, I don't need to send it to all of them. But I had made a list. And when the publisher was asking for quotes to put on the back of the book, I said, well, maybe some of these people would be interested in writing something. And so I'm holding my breath thinking, you know, if it's no good, we won't put it on the book. Well, I got the most wonderful comments from, Egil Björnsson, who's the author of How Iceland Changed the World, Gisli Sigurdsson, who is a professor at the Arne Magnusson Institute, who writes about sagas and folklore, Gisli Paulsson, who's a good friend of mine and an anthropologist, Terry Gunnell, the folklore professor at the University of Iceland that I quoted many times in the book, and Arman Jakobsson, who I also quoted in the book. And they all got the point. They all liked, how I was approaching the concept of elves in Iceland, and not making fun of them, not laughing at them, but maybe laughing with them when it was, a humorous story. I actually started out this talk with a quote from Terry, who said it was a love song to the living landscape of Iceland and the cultural history in which it is clothed, inspired by the author's numerous encounters with the country and its people over the last decades. And I thought, yeah, this really is a love song to Iceland. This is summing up, what I've learned there over 35 years of visiting the country. And it was only after I had completely finished the book and was putting together, the book tour and the lectures about it, that I realized that one of the first projects I had done about Iceland was in 1988. I got a 3-month fellowship from the American Scandinavian Foundation to study in Iceland. And the project that I got the grant for was to study folklore, to answer the question, what is the Icelanders' approach to nature, especially in the sagas and in the folklore? And I realized, 34 years later, I have finally finished that project. I finally wrote the report. So this book is sort of fulfilling a promise that I had made a long time ago.
Well, what a journey to get it done.
Yeah, and I hadn't thought of that I was still working on the same topic that I had started in 1986. So because of course I did file whatever formal report I was supposed to file on that project, but I had seen it as research for a novel that I was planning on writing that never got finished. I didn't realize that the idea of how Icelanders look at nature has been stuck in my head for 35 years, and that there really is something different and something we can learn from their approach.
Well, I heard that you got props from the president of Iceland recently. Tell us about that.
That was like really amazing. I was just in Iceland last week for a meeting of the Leifur Eriksson Foundation. And this is a scholarship or fellowship granting organization that gives $25,000 grants to graduate students from America to study or do research in Iceland, and for Icelandic students to come to the US to finish their graduate degrees. And we have a meeting in Iceland every year. This year, our past president, John Casteen, was awarded the Order of the Falcon, which is quite an honor from the Icelandic government. And the rest of us on the board and the selection committee got to go and attend the ceremony when he was awarded the Order of the Falcon. And I managed to find myself standing next to the president, and John, being the wonderful person he is, started talking up my books. And the president looked and he says, "Oh, I've read your books." He said, "I really liked the one with the red cover." It's like, oh, that was Song of the Vikings, my biography of Snorri Sturluson. So I left him a copy of Looking for the Hidden Folk, and I'm hoping that he'll get a chance to read it and share it with his wife, Eliza, who's also a writer.
Well done.
Yeah, that was really, really cool. When he said, "I've read your books," I'm like, mouth hits the floor.
Well, it looks like we have a couple of questions, and I do want to mention to the audience that Nancy has agreed to answer questions that you may have about her previous books as well. So don't feel like you have to ask questions about the book that isn't actually released yet. But we do have a couple questions. Charisse Lacey asks or says, "Hi, Nancy, I miss being in your presence. I do have a question. Have you noticed any change in other spiritual values of the Icelanders over your years of traveling there? Have beliefs altered, changed? Have new entities and views been adopted?"
Well, I guess really the one thing that I have noticed that has changed, and not for the better, um, is that the younger people don't seem to have the same connection to the land and to the stories as the older people do. Um, when I first started going to Iceland, I would go to a farm, and the farmers would, knowing what my interest was, and that I was a writer and I was interested in stories, they would say, "Do you know the story of this farm?" And they tell me the story of the farm. "Do you know the story of the mountain that we can see over there? Do you know the story of this hot spring or ale spring or waterfall?" And they would just keep going. You could not walk through the countryside or take a horseback ride without them stopping and pointing out this and pointing out that. And they knew all these stories, and they shared them with me. Um, Now the younger people aren't so connected to, the spiritual life of the land, and they don't remember the stories. They don't love the stories as much. They kind of have to be prodded into it. Um, I have left them copies of sagas and said, "Here, you have to read this. This is about your farm." And I don't know whether it actually works or not. Um, So I see that as Icelanders are moving more and more into the city, and they're becoming, I I think they're becoming Americanized in a lot of ways. You see a lot more large cars than you did 35 years ago. When I first came to Iceland, um, the people I was staying with, it was the family of one of the graduate students at Penn State. They didn't have a car of any kind, and they wanted to take me out to Thingvellir. So they were calling around all of their friends to say, "Can we borrow your car? Because we have these two Americans that would like to go out to Thingvellir, and we want to take them out." On the other hand, you could get everywhere by bus, so it wasn't, a car wasn't necessary back in the 1980s. But there's other ways in which, and I think Americans are much worse at this than Icelanders, but they've started to lose that important connection to the earth, and they need to be reminded. And that's one of the things that Ragnhildur Jónsdóttir does with her elf walks and her elf stories is, she tries to shake people up. She tries to get them to notice the beauty that they're just walking past and maybe not paying attention to anymore. The tiny little flowers, and what lives in the mosses, and what lives in the lava field, and how sitting in a lava field can, it can be more than just meditation, but it sort of opens you up to this whole new level of consciousness when you are sitting in nature and actually paying attention to it. And as she says, who knows, there might be an elf coming out to play if you're sitting quietly enough and paying attention. But I guess that I'm not sure if that answers Sharice's question about other aspects of spirituality. I guess one good new thing is that the pagan religion Ásatru, which I also mention in the book, has been accepted as an official religion in Iceland, and you can be a member of Ásatru instead of being forced to be part of the Lutheran Church in Iceland. And the religion, the rituals that go with the religion, are sourced from Norse mythology and the sagas, and they're trying to come up with a modern way of having a relationship to the pagan gods and to nature. It's a very nature-based religion. And that has become, I think I saw one statistics that it's the fastest growing religion in Iceland, which means that it's gaining adherents, whereas other religions are maybe losing them. So this idea of having essentially a nature-based religion is starting to catch on. And I think that's a really good thing, especially since most Icelanders now live in the city and they don't have the daily interaction with rocks and stones and hills in which people live.
We have a comment from Laurel Freeman, and she says, Nancy, I was at Snorristaðir and we met there a few times. My Langama had lived at Litlaram before moving to North Dakota. When I walked down to the water to bid her goodbye, the day we were leaving, just then a big silver fish leapt out of the water and splashed back down. Only time I had experienced that in Iceland. Spirits of those who have departed, have you had experiences like that? I look forward to reading your book. Thanks and best wishes, Laurel Freeman.
Thank you, Laurel. I remember meeting you too. Snorristaðir is one of my favorite places, and I write in the book about taking what I call a walk of joy from Snorristaðir to Litlahraun through on a path that's been there since the Saga age and is rather difficult to find again because for a couple of years the family at Snorristaðir led horseback tours through the lava field, but then they decided that was really too hard on the horses, and riding on the beach is a whole lot more fun because you can go fast. So now they're not using the path, and I'm one of the few people who comes every year and walks that path to Litlahraun. There is a new road through the lava field to the house at Litlahraun itself and the two new summer houses that are right next to it, one of which I really wish I owned, but I don't. If it's ever for sale, I really hope I know about it. But most people who travel to Litlahraun now would go by that road instead of taking this windy path through the lava field. And every time I'm on that path, I feel like there are spirits around me. I feel, that there are friends that come to meet me, whether they are the eagle or a sheep or the neighbor's herd of horses that happens to be out. Sometimes they let their young horses run back and forth on the beach, and they sometimes come ashore at Litlahraun. Or, just the rocks, the cairns that are built there, and that are slowly falling down. And I always try to build them back up when I go by. I put more stones on them. But it's definitely a place of deep history, and of many people have walked that path, and you feel that you are walking with them when you do so. And it's one of those places in Iceland, and there's many of them that I know, where you are absolutely all alone. There is no one else there, and there are places on that path where you cannot see a house, another house, or a road, or anything human at all. And it is quite an experience to just be out there in whatever weather it gives you. I often try to not even bring a cell phone, so I'm just out there by myself and can sort of forget what century I live in. It's a really very special place for me.
You mentioned that this book started out as a collection of travel essays before it was hijacked by the Elves. You've traveled to Iceland so extensively that it seems you must have many journals full of material. So I'm wondering if we can look forward to that collection of travel essays being released.
Well, I think this really is the collection of travel essays. There were a few stories that I did leave out, and of course there are more stories happening every time I go. My husband actually asked me this morning, what number trip was it that you just came back from? And it was number 33. So we're doing pretty well. One of the essays that I had been working on for many years was the one riding the keel that you saw a portion of in the Icelandic Horse Quarterly. There's a little bit longer version in the book, and then there's an even longer version that is, sort of in the filing cabinet. And it will probably stay in the filing cabinet because I've already printed now part of the story. When I was writing these travel essays, they just didn't seem to have a focus. They didn't have a point to them. It was just, okay, there's a lot of things that I see, a lot of things I do. And I didn't have really a cohesive sense of how to present them. It was just like, okay, I went riding across the center of Iceland. I saw a volcano erupt. I I forget even which other pieces I had sort of lying around my office. And as I was thinking about, okay, well, how am I going to put these together in a book, and how am I going to, make it seem? And then I met Rockhilder, and I said, okay, there's another essay from my collection, Walking with the Elf Lady. And that essay just started getting longer and longer and longer until it really wasn't an essay anymore. It was more of a book. And I thought, well, okay, so I have one like really long essay and a couple of really short ones. And then I was actually, I guess it was like 2016, right after I had met Rockhilder and was working on the essay. And I was taking a bus to Cape Cod to give a reading at a bookstore about my book, Ivory Vikings. And I'm on this seemingly very, very long bus ride. And I started thinking about this collection of essays. And suddenly, I got my notebook out because I started seeing how all of the previous experiences related to elves, or related to the idea of elves, because they related to how Icelanders interact with nature and what nature means to this Icelander or that Icelander, and how they deal with weather and wilderness and danger and beauty and those sorts of things. And so, there on the bus, I started outlining, well, you tell this part about Rockhilder, and then you go off into this direction, and then you tell this story, and then you tell that story. And they all started working together so that they became a book. And then when I wrote, following that outline, I put the pieces together, and I had all kinds of questions that they raised. So you have these stories of my experiences, and then I said, but what do we mean by the word belief, and what do we mean by the word elf, and how old is that word, and what did it mean, back in the saga age, and what can I find out about, seeing? She says she can see elves. Well, what does eyesight involve? And then I read Stefan Jonsson in the newspaper lookbook Heimskringla, who said something like, Icelanders don't believe in elves the same way that they believe in gravity. And I thought, oh, how do Icelanders believe in gravity? So here I had to go study the theory of gravity. It's like, well, do I believe in gravity? And how do you believe in something like gravity? So, it just sort of went in all different directions. It was all these questions that these experiences raised. And so the book, kind of becomes a collage, or a scrapbook, or a conversation, as I like to think of it. And when I finished, quote unquote, finished it, I sent it to a couple of my good friends who are excellent readers. And I said, is this really a book? And they all thankfully responded, yes, this is a book. You need to print this. So I was like, okay, good. It went somewhere.
Well, I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
Great advice they give you. Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. If there's not going to be a collection of travel essays, what are you working on?
I wish I knew. I'm trying, first to get this book launched, because I had another book that came out last year with the COVID crisis. You never want to have two books coming out close together like this, but because they were both delayed because of COVID, this is what had happened. And I felt like I never really gave the Real Valkyrie a chance to be out in the world, because we could only do publicity on Zoom. I couldn't actually go out and talk to people about it. So I said, okay, for the hidden folk, I'm going to give it a real book tour. We're going to go places and see people and talk about the books. And then in November, I'm going to decide, okay, what am I doing? What do I do for a living? How do you write books? Like, where do you start? But I realized that when this book came out, that I have now written nonfiction exclusively almost exclusively for about 20 years. So I had 20 years as a magazine writer and now 20 years as a nonfiction writer with one novel stuck in there. And I think that what I would really like to do next is to write another historical novel. And to the person who's been in the back of my mind for almost 10 years now is the daughter of Snorri Sturluson, Inga Björk. So there might be a novel about Inga Björk coming out, in 5 years or so.
Okay. Well, gives us something to look forward to.
Yeah, it'll be a while.
Well, and fortunately for us, there are a lot of previous releases that if we aren't all caught up on, we can stay busy.
Yeah,
in the next
there
few
are
years.
7 books about Iceland. I actually put together a little flyer on, okay, so if you like this one, what else should you read? And so I have 7 books about Iceland now.
Well, Looking for the Hidden Folk is being released tomorrow. So those of us that have pre-ordered it will have it in our mailboxes very soon. And those that haven't pre-ordered can go and ask your local bookseller to bring it in, or you can order it online through the Nancy Marie Brown store on bookshop.org. And I think Doug's gonna post that link so that people will have it to reference. But speaking of your list of other books, one of the things that I think is really neat about your bookstore on bookshop.org is that not only can we see your list of previous releases, but you also have these really nicely curated lists of some of your favorite books by other authors about Iceland and Vikings and the like. So I really encourage people to go there if you haven't already ordered The Hidden Folk. Go to bookshop.org and look for the Nancy Marie Brown store and order it there. Nancy, these are such beautiful stories to read, and it's been really special hearing you tell them. And so thank you for doing this tonight and sharing these with us.
Thanks very much, Carrie. It's been fun.
Well, thank you both, Carrie and Nancy, for just a wonderful presentation. Nancy, it's obvious that your travel logs and my travel logs are very, very different. Mine are very much along the line. Okay, stopped at N1, had lunch, kept on down the road, whereas yours are these beautiful flowing stories. Thank you. I can't wait to read the book. Before we go tonight, I just want to let everybody know about our next presentation. It will be by Emmy Award winner and independent filmmaker Pamela Hogan, taking place on Monday, October 24th. Pam will be talking about the making of the film, The Long Friday, which is a documentary of the day in October 1975 that the women in Iceland went on strike. It will be a very interesting program. I encourage you all to tune in for it. Information will be coming out in the next week about the program and the presentation, and we'll also have it posted on our INLUS events calendar. So stay tuned for that. Again, Nancy and Carrie, thank you so much. And I also want to thank all the attendees for joining us this evening. Bye-bye.